So why do people fight for the status quo when the status quo isn't working? Well, a lot of it has to do with just being comfortable, but maybe there's more than that. Hey there, this is Perch, and talking about the status quo and why is it it's human nature. Do people fight so hard to maintain a broken status quo where things are either more difficult to do, more costly, not making as much money as they should, or just not as enjoyable as they should be? You can equate it to the idea of somebody staying in a loveless marriage. They're not happy, it's not working out for anyone, but it is what people know. And so they stick with it. They're afraid of change. And so they don't change. And a lot of this, you see this everywhere. You see it in pharmaceuticals, you see it in government, you see it in schools, you see it in technology. You often can go into a company where you've got a bunch of, for lack of a better word, old timers doing things a certain way. It's highly inefficient. It doesn't work anymore. And it's time for change. And these people will resist change right into the ground, right into the point that they lose their jobs or that they drive the company or the group into unprofitability. One of the most dangerous things if you're a small company that you can make, and you've been in the business for any length of time. That's why startups, they say, if you're a small company startup and you haven't made it in 2.5 to 3 years, you're never going to make it. Because the problem is time starts advancing on you. And a lot of the foundational thinking you had in a company changes quickly. And if you can't change with it, and it's against kind of natural human behavior to change, then you're lost. You're fighting an uphill battle. And if you're tiny, you don't have the money to fight an uphill battle. Well, what does it have to do with comics? Well, comics has a ton of status quo, old mentality thinking as a part of it. It absolutely does. It's an industry that, as is true as publishing in general, typically has a number of practices and ways of doing business and proofing comps and reviewing stories and looking at pitches and all the rest that are anywhere from 30 to 40 years old. And on one hand, you can say, hey, why change the classics? Why change what's working? And the answer is a lot of it isn't working anymore. Time has moved on. Digital communication, ways that storytelling happens, how people consume content, things have changed. And creators on all fronts and publishers have to start changing with it. You can't just stay exactly where you are and hope things are good forever. Any company that does that quickly learns it's not good forever. And not just companies, but people. Even if you have $1 billion, if you take your $1 billion off to an island, you sit there and you just slowly spend your money thinking this is going to go on forever. It won't. You are going to die. No matter what happens, the ride ends at some point. And this is the challenge for a lot of current publishers in comics is they've been enjoying this ride. In some cases, they got an extra shot in the arm that was maybe a little unnatural in the instance of Disney purchasing Marvel or Time Warner with Disney or DC, not Disney. What am I talking about? You see these things happen, and companies are allowed to kind of continue on somebody else's bankroll, somebody else's investment, and there's no big motivation, no impetus to change their ways. Now, when I say change their ways, I'm not talking, oh, you got to get rid of all the creators and start new. Nothing like that. There's just some very simple things that need to be different. How these comic companies act and interact with comic conventions is a great example. There's a reason why San Diego Comic-Con feels a whole lot less like comics these days. Media has taken over. Faster, more well-funded, hungrier businesses have absolutely dominated that show, pushing comics into the background. Another big way is around distribution in general. Comic publishers worked with Diamond because they had been basically sent into a corner, and that was the only game left in town come the late 90s. So Marvel and DC, they hop on board and they prop up Diamond, and on it goes. But the problem is today, Diamond does not work, not on any level. But it's comfortable, it's familiar, it's what people know. And so they keep doing it. Why change what's broken? things that are broken don't usually break all at once. They kind of sneak up on you. And that's the challenge with comics and a lot of different businesses is things break and it just gets a little bit more inefficient, a little bit more painful to do business, a little bit more painful to get creative content and to acquire new customers. Everything just gets a little harder. And the harder it gets, the harder people have to work. And the harder they have to work, the more quality drops. And the more quality drops, the more profits drop. Now, you may say, wait a minute, Marvel, DC, the comics industry in general, it is making a lot of money. Profits are going up. And that's true. I'm not one of those people who's saying that, oh my God, we're in a free fall and everything's about to die. Not at all. But I am saying that in general, the efficiencies of getting those dollars are not what they were. If you look at just basic ROI or EBITDA, the cost of acquiring a customer for comics is much higher than it used to be. When I say cost of acquiring a customer, I mean doing the marketing, getting somebody who's not reading comics to start reading comics. What's the level of investment necessary to get that customer? Well, it should be pretty easy right now. You've got billion-dollar movies out. You've got pop culture attention all over everywhere for comics things. You have a lot of quote unquote free marketing for comics. Yet the cost to acquire a customer, the cost to get a customer into a shop, buying a comic, subscribing to a comic, keeps rising. And the costs of comics themselves keep rising. So people are making money, things are profitable, that's all great. But these aren't necessarily good metrics. And the problem with a lot of these metrics are not social hammering on social media. It's not anti-Trump people. It's not politics. No, the biggest problem is inefficiency. It's old thinking pushed into a business that needs to evolve. The world around it is evolving rapidly. Almost every other form of media has changed pretty significantly in the last 10 years, mostly in digital ways. You've got streaming platforms, you got new business models, you got subscription services, you have all kinds of new things. Comics still has a price tag on the cover and is sold on a shelf. There's very little other media that's like that. I mean, it's right there with newspapers being sold in Starbucks. So it's comfortable. I get it. And there's a lot of people in the publishers who sit at their desk and they're happy. They know what the world looks like. They know all parts of this business. And that's cool. But they ought to be learning something different because what they know is quickly becoming not viable. That's just change. It's evolution. You have to change with the times. If you don't, times change without you. Now, it sounds like I'm painting kind of a dire picture, and I'm not. That's not my purpose. Comics and entertainment properties are still cool, no matter what. I mean, it's hard to make Spider-Man uncool. Now, some people definitely are, able to find a way, but it's still tough. Spider-Man is still Spider-Man. Batman is still Batman. No matter how sad or mopey or depressed Batman is about Catwoman, it's still Batman. The rehabbing of Batman won't take long if it needs to be done at all. I mean, tomorrow you could put out a Batman comic with a A-class creative team. I mean, for that matter, you are. Capullo and Snyder are putting out a Batman title. It sells great. People like it. It does fine. The properties aren't the problem. It's the practices in the background that are the problem. And it's not going to lead to death. It's just holding the business back from all it can be. You have to be willing to evolve. You have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to accept the fact that not everything stays the way it is forever. The status quo, while comfortable, is also death. Death is comfortable. And a lot of people are finding that out the hard way. It's why in comics you see kind of a sea change every 15 to 20 years. You see the business finally hit a snapping point where things just have to change. And so they do. But when it gets to that point, it usually leaves a lot of bodies on the floor. Now, comics is typically not very kind to its quote unquote veterans. There are a lot of comic creators out there who 10, 15 years ago were big names. Today, they're shuffled off to tiny publishers that make less than many large comic stores. Well, that's an exaggeration, actually. They make less than, I don't know. They don't make as what they should. I want to be I want to be factual here. I, I'll put it this way. Let me change that up just slightly. There are small publishers that make less than what Midtown Comics makes. That is true, and that shouldn't be, at least not in the way we're talking about. You have to be willing to make change. You just have to, and it's not. It's one of those things where you can either smile, get on board, plan for change, and try and work with it, or you can just sit back and let it steamroll you. And in some cases, when you have older companies managed by older people who are just kind of looking to retire, that are just wanting to ride this thing out to the sunset, they don't care. They're smart enough to know that, yeah, it is all going away at some point. Maybe some point soon, but they're just going to relax and enjoy the ride for as long as it lasts. And hey, nothing wrong with that, unless you happen to be one of the employees in this company who's not really on board with just letting it collapse. This is a challenge you have for a lot of small to medium sized companies where they do okay. They get several $1 million of ongoing yearly revenue, and the person in charge, the owner, is living happy with a $750,000, $800,000 a year paycheck. They're doing okay. They're maybe in their late 50s, early 60s. This is their last score, and they got it. They've got their nice house, things are paid off, kids are in college, and they're just kind of relaxing, squeezing in those last dollars before they veer off into retirement. Again, nothing wrong with that for the rich guy. There is a big something wrong with it for the 20 or 30 or so employees that are making sub 100,000 a year and are kind of hoping this will be a job that's going to go somewhere. Those people are usually not thrilled about the status quo, but they can be tricked into thinking the status quo is the only answer. And this is some of what happens in comics. You get people come in, you get people saying, well, this is the way it is. This is life. I've acclimated. This is what I know. This is what I'm used to. And because I know this business fairly well, it's powerful. New people coming into the business do not know what I know. Therefore, my job is secure. And it's like, yeah, it's true you have some proprietary knowledge, and it's true that proprietary knowledge can be valuable if the proprietary knowledge itself is valuable. Just knowing something nobody else knows doesn't mean much if what you know is useless. There's a lot of people who know Latin. They learned it in college. They've got it. Most of those people have zero use for that in their everyday life. Now, granted, they have an advantage in the sense that they know Latin and other people don't. But knowing Latin itself is somewhat meaningless if you can't apply it to your daily life. And this is a little bit what the status quo looks like in comics. You have to change. You have to evolve. You have to move on. And that can be scary. You may not be good at some of the new stuff. Some younger, smarter, faster talent may be better than you, putting your job in jeopardy. So it can be safer to defend your turf rather than evolve. Or at least it can feel that way. But I'm telling you, it's false hope. It's an illusion. Protecting old turf just makes you old. And that doesn't really help anyone. Certainly not yourself, certainly not comics. I don't know. What do you think? Do you deal with the status quo? Do you deal with people who cling on to it long after the battle is over? Hey, leave me a comment below. Would love to know what you think. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. And thanks for listening.